Alright guys, we've got here a Dobinsons strut straight out of the box. This is a GX470 Now these are stamped right into the metal if you're ever trying to identify what your shock part number is. See it stamped in there right below the Dobinsons logo. We've got the Dobinsons strut mount. Of course these are a OE replacement, look just like original, and everything's new. This comes with bushings and the washer. So this is everything that's included when you buy a strut mount, a Dobinsons strut, and then of course we've got a coil right here, this red one. Back here we've got one that's already assembled, so I'm going to give you a little bit of explanation of what the assembly sequence is of this, because it seems to be confusing a lot of people. So right here what we've got first is we're going to take off the nut, the washers, all this stuff, and I'm going to show you what the difference is here and what all this stuff does. So first with the strut, this is the top lip seal. This is the most common place for any strut to fail, if it was to ever fail. And I don't know if you can see it, but that silver ring, that's a spring-loaded clip that holds pressure against the seal. It's called a swiping seal to stop the crap from getting on the shaft. Now the less crap that's on the shaft, the less crap it has to try and wipe off. So that's why it comes with this boot. Now this is like an ABS plastic. It's very pliable. It can change shape quite easily. So if you get one that's in your box that's a little bit, like maybe it's shaped like that, then all you would do is you would just mess with it a little bit until it goes back to its standard round shape. It comes with a washer that's a stabilizing washer, and that's going to sit right against the top of this edge right here. So the first thing you're going to do, it comes like this, but I'm just showing you what's underneath here, is put that on there, and that's going to stay on there to protect that chrome shaft from getting excess junk. Of course now the only way stuff could get in there is to try and get up inside one of these gaps, and that's not so easy on a strut, because you can see inside this one, it's not very visible. Alright, so we've got, this is the strut protective cover. Next I'm going to show you the sequence of what goes onto the actual stud right up here on the top of the shock. Now the Dobinsons shock, ignore the stuff that comes from with the top mount. The strut comes with everything you need if you're if you're using a existing strut mount. First you're going to take your washer, faces up. Then you've got your lipped bushing. You see the little edge right there? That's going to go on here. And there's a washer that also has a lip on it. You can see that little lip right there. That goes on the bushing, and literally the bushing fits inside of there. So try and get it up close here so you can see that you have a lip and a lipped washer. Now here's the trick that everyone gets wrong. A new strut mount, a good quality strut mount, comes with that bushing and that washer already glued in. Those are already in there, and it's very hard to see in this picture, but that's the top of the bushing right there, and the washer is already inside there. So on this, with the strut, we're not going to use that. So the next thing that'll go on the strut, after of course you put the coil, is this top mount, because that's the washer and the bushing. Yeah, it's going to be a bit tight, of course. These are all rubber bushings. Next bushing that goes on top of that is the bushing that has no lip. That's the flat bushing that goes right on here with the larger of the two washers. I didn't show you, but the washer that was underneath is a little bit smaller. This is the larger of the two washers, and it goes face down. It's going to hug the bushing completely, and then the nut. The nut is going to go right on there. Now imagine for a second, when you've got the coil spring on here, the coil spring is going to get located by this lip right here, and down here in this coil seat it's going to sit the notch right there. When this gets tightened down, these bushings have to get to a certain thickness. Now how do you know what thickness that is? Well, it's where this nut stops on the threads. So let's have a look at what thickness that is. That's where the threads stop, right there. So when this is tight, this nut is going to be sitting against there. It is not properly tight until that nut is sitting down against there. So imagine now you've got a brand new bushing on the inside, which is this one. but it's already mounted in the cap. That's got to compress by about half. And this top bushing right here that goes on the top, once you've got the coil in place, it has to compress by about half, because remember, the threads stop about halfway down this bushing. So, and this is a nylock thread, so in order to tighten that down, you've got to have the right tools to hold the shaft from spinning. So what does that look like once it's installed and set all the way down? That is what it looks like. So let's have a look again at the shaft without the bushing, so you can try and get a relative view of the two. Remember, we said the bushing was going to be on here, and this nut had to compress all the way down. So you can see just how much compression you have to put down on this. This is why you can't really use crappy tools for this. You've got to have the right strut spring compressor. Once again, until this nut is at the bottom of the threads, it's not tight. It may feel like it's tight. Why does it feel like it's tight? Because this is an almost 600-pound spring that's going to be compressed by a couple of inches, so it's going to have about 1,200 pounds of pressure on it before you can tighten that nut up all the way. So let's show you that here in a second. Alright, we've got some beeping action going on, but what we've got now is where the coil spring just laid down so it's easier for framing here. The end of the coil spring sits with the tab against the shock right here, and of course the coil spring has to be compressed. Now remember, we've got to get this mount, this flat bushing, this washer, and this nut on here, all to do that. Now tell me, how many inches is that? This is actually a pretty tall coil. This is the 314s. This coil has to be compressed at least 3 inches. So are you going to be able to put 1,800 pounds of pressure on this coil with some homemade tools or rented tools? Probably not. Now, the other thing people forget is how tight the coil gets once it's compressed. These are actually almost the same coils. These are 302s, these are 314s, but the coil spacing is very similar. The spacing between this is much different between a uncompressed coil. So basically, I'm going to show you here in a second what it looks like on a coil spring machine on a strut spring compressor for how we're actually going to get all these components put together properly. So this is a proper strut spring compressor. The coil spring is grabbed by these lips just from the inside, and you see that the lips are not very thick. It puts pressure on the coil spring to grab it up. This top mount, this top part of the tool I should say, puts pressure down on the top mount, and as part of this we've also got orientation. That's a different subject, but so this puts the right kind of spring pressure down. And now if you remember, like this, see, I can barely fit my finger inside these gaps, so once it loosens up, once it gets tight, it'll be like the other one on the table. But this is how far this strut needs to be, the coil needs to be compressed before you can even put the bushings on there. Once again, remember, there's the top of the threads right there. So the strut's going to come up a little bit more once it gets tightened, because there's a little bit of pressure right now in this setup. Well, actually, there's about 2,000 pounds of pressure, I should say, in this coil spring. It doesn't look like much, but if you flip the wrong thing right now, you're screwed. The next step is going to be to put the flat washer and the bushing onto the threaded part, and then the nylock nut. We're going to hold the shaft. It's got flat side on both sides, and then we're going to use a special tool we've got to tighten this up. Alright, so we've got this tightened down. I just want to give you a quick heads up. The actual bushing and the washer, the bushing is as fat as the washer once it's compressed. This won't tighten down anymore because it's at the bottom of the threads. So I just want to point that out. Now, you see the pressure is still, you can see the gap right here? this coil spring is still under pressure, so we're going to let it go here in a second and show you what happens to those top bushings. Alright, so we're going to release the pressure right now, and this coil is going to get longer as it sits in the bottom of the coil seat completely, and just watch this top mount. Didn't look like much, did it? But it's still. So now these coil, these grips right here are going to back out. We'll do that here in a second. But now this is fully assembled. Everything's nice and neat. And look at how much preload is on that bushing. You see? It's the same thickness as the washer. You can tell if you've used the wrong top washer because the washer will be cutting into the bushing. You don't want that. Once this gets installed into a car, I'll show you a photo of that afterwards. You're going to see the top mount relieve pressure because the car weight is going to put pressure on the coil.